Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. My name is Andrew Sussman. I serve on the board of the IAE. I've been working with Wally Snyder and other board members to develop today's symposium. Our intent is to build awareness and to generate broad-based support. We're very proud of our ethical experts. I've spoken with many of you. I know everyone here is committed to facing the changes needed in our industry in a post-digital world. Consumers, citizens, and government are seeking new bargains in data privacy, personal safety, and economic opportunity. These new bargains turn out to have historical roots. Unfair print practices drove the formation of the AAF itself in 1905. The 1920s brought swamp brokers to radio, and the 60s and 70s saw fake doctors and unlikely game shows on network TV. Bargains were struck then. A new bargain will be struck now. Wally Snyder has been perfecting the IAE's curriculum for over a decade. That curriculum has never been so relevant. The digital revolution has undermined traditional systems of quality control. Opportunities are rife for non-competent actors whose credentials go largely unchecked. The IAE is an independent body, deploying an accredited certification, the Certified Ethical Advertising Executive. Our focus is to secure professional and institutional performance without imposing false measures that distort that performance. Realizing that aspiration requires an act of will. I will close by thanking participants like you and our fine partners at Google and Safeguard Privacy for their own acts of will. Thanks also to Purpose Worldwide and to AAF CEO Steve Pacheco. I now turn to you, my friend and colleague, Mr. Wallace C. S. Snyder, most distinguished founder and executive director of the Institute.
Thank you very much. I'm going to introduce our wonderful panel in a moment, but just to build on what Andrew was saying, today we're going to be talking about data ethics. We're really going to be talking about how we need to build trust with our consumers and our business partners through transparency. And you know, we're at a critical time because consumers now have access to all kinds of information. They can find out when their data is being collected against their wishes, and they can report this back onto government. The California has just introduced a major piece of legislation, the Consumer Privacy Act, which is going to take place. It's going to start July 1st. It's going to give consumers unbelievable power to not have their data collected and then to actually get money damages if it is collected. And we're going to talk about that in detail. But the whole point is we're at a critical juncture. We know what we have to do, and today we're going to discuss with our panelists how to do it. We're going to really talk about from the IAE why ethics is important, and we want to talk about how we practice this ethics in a very competitive environment. And so let me introduce this wonderful panel that we have with us today. Joanne Stonier, Chief Data Officer, MasterCard. We got Jeff Niebuhr, Senior Director for Microsoft. We've got Kendra Clark, who is our VP of Data Science and Product Development for Sparks and Honey. We have Steve Pacheco, President and CEO of the American Advertising Federation. We've got Lee Peeler, who is a former EVP for the Better Business Bureau National Programs. And we got Wayne Mattis, who is the founder and the co-founder of the Safeguard Privacy. This is a wonderful group. Today we're going to go through why and how to practice transparency and building trust. And we're having a conversation here. I want us to really have interaction as we go through and do this. So with that, I would like to ask Lee Peeler to give us a summary of this California legislation, which will take place in 3 weeks, July 1st in California. Lee.
Thank you, Wally, and thank you for including me. if we're talking about ethics, a critical component of ethics is legal compliance. If you're talking about legal compliance in the data area, until this year, you would be talking about the Federal Trade Commission Act, which approached privacy issues on a transparency basis. So it encouraged the posting of privacy policies, and if you did not follow your posted privacy policies, the FTC would pursue you for deceptive practices, and that, for example, resulted in the $5 billion B with a boy $1 billion fine that was levied against Facebook last year. Another piece of the transparency puzzle until recently was the advertising industry's own self-regulatory program, which in really a groundbreaking effort established an ad choices icon to give consumers choices about the collection and use of data for interest-based advertising. But as of this year, major compliance focus has to be on state law, and especially, but not only, the California Consumer Privacy Act. The California statute applies to any business over $25 million that collects data from a California resident, or any business with data on more than 50,000 consumers, regardless of that business size. It applies to a broadly defined class of personal information. It became effective on January 1st, actually, and on July 1st, as Wally noted, enforcement is starting by the California Attorney General. So there was a 6-month period where the statute was effective, but no enforcement was being conducted. Implementing regulations were finalized last week by the California Attorney General and have been sent to the California Office of Administrative Law for review and approval, with the AG's request that they be approved in 30 business days to meet the statutory deadline. And the California Attorney General has made the point that the law has been effective since January 1st, and he doesn't see any reason not to start enforcement on July 1st. At the risk of simplifying a very complex statute, the law requires disclosure before data is collected from the consumer, the categories of information to be collected, and the purposes for which that information is being collected have to be disclosed to the consumer. If a consumer requests it, you must also disclose to the consumer the specific information you have on it. There are some exceptions, but basically you need to find what information you have about the consumer and disclose it. The obligation extends back to any information collected in 12 months prior to the request. So if you get a request on July 1st, you need to go back to July 1st, 2019 for your disclosure. A consumer has a right to have any information deleted at his request. And if you delete the information, you also have to notify your service providers. A business that sells consumer information and selling is defined very broadly to include any exchange for value, must include on its homepage a clear "Do not sell my information" button. And if the consumer or a consumer's representative asks, the business may not sell or exchange for consideration that consumer's information to any third party, including advertisers. In addition, before a consumer can collect or sell information about a minor, it must obtain opt-in consent. And a business, and another requirement of the law is a business cannot discriminate. In other words, it cannot treat a consumer differently based on price, quality, or service, based on their exercise of any of their CCPA rights, including their right to opt out of the sale or the exchange or a request for deletion. The exception to this discrimination rule is that a business can offer a financial incentive, including a different price, to consumers that opt in to sharing of their information, as long as the business can show that the value of the information, the value of the financial incentive provided is directly related to the value of the personal information provided. And finally, these requirements have teeth, and an action by the California State Attorney General after 30 days notice, any business or service provider or other person that violates the law is subject to an injunction and is liable for a civil penalty of not more than $2,500 for each violation. So it's not just $2,500, it's $2,500 per violation. And if the violations are intentional, $7,500. Also, if there is a breach, a data breach that's caused by business failure to follow reasonable security practices, a consumer, after notice to the AG, can file its own action and seek minimum statutory damages of $100 to $750. And again, that's for each consumer whose data is breached. So that's an overview, lots and lots of details. We could spend the whole afternoon just talking about how you know whether the consumer who's asking for disclosure is the consumer that you have information on. But the basic point is consumer data is now on its way to becoming a regulated industry, very much like the credit reporting industry and the financial services market. So I hope that's a good summary and look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Lee. Now, it's my understanding also that just the last week, we had our ad groups petition the California court in an attempt to remove the universal consumer opt-out, and that's been rejected by the state of California. So that is still in there. It's a very powerful incentive. Wayne, I'd like to come to you a moment because to talk about the implications of this on our industry. I know you also have been following international and European businesses, but we've now had this thing that's going to take effect July 1st, and your views on how you think this is going to really affect our industry and what getting going.
Let me preface by saying that while I'm now at Safeguard Privacy, I spent 8 years as a managing director of UBS dealing with GDPR compliance, so I'm familiar with European privacy. I founded one of the larger and highly ranked privacy practices when I was a partner at Pillsbury Winthrop Shaw Pittman, and I've worked for the US government. So I've been around in a few different areas. And what I really would like to talk about was the Advertising Federation's view of what is transparency and trust and self-interest.
Okay.
Self-regulation is what prevents government regulation. The SEC, the FTC, the CFEC, antitrust laws are all a result of the lack of self-regulation. I think that we all should be able to admit, in spite of how unpopular this statement might be, that a dense 30-page privacy policy with a pre-checkmark click here to consent is not in the mind of the public transparency. And the CCPA was the result of this perceived lack of transparency. The public perception was that they didn't understand how their personal information was used. And that's something the industry needs to deal with. And the right to opt out was given because people didn't know how their information was being used and they wanted to have the right to stop it. What was the reaction to the CCPA? The industry reaction was predictable and the public response was predictable. There are certain advertising groups that have suggested that the disclosure of personal information relating to behavioral advertising may not be a sale of personal information, giving the opt-out right. What's the public response to that position? There now is the CPRA, not the CCPA, but the CPRA, that acknowledges that there's a possible distinction between the sharing of personal information for cross-contextual behavioral advertising and sales of personal information. And what does it then do? It provides the consumer the right to opt out from the sharing of information as well. So what are we learning? What we're learning is that for every action, you get a reaction. And on top of that, it's not just a simple reaction, it then goes further. And among other significant changes, you now have the establishment, or the proposal for the establishment, of a state regulatory agency in California called the California Privacy Protection Agency with enforcement powers. There's a referendum that has 920,000 signatures. Only 620,000 signatures were needed to put it on the ballot in November. and it has 88% public support. What's my point in all of this? I've seen this story before. We're going to see it again unless something is done to change it. An independent organization would be a really good way to build trust with consumers so that you prevent over-regulation of the industry.
Thank you very much. I wanted to make sure now, Joanne, you're on with us? But I can't, you have to unmute.
Yes, hi.
Hey, we got her. Okay, good.
Got me. Took a while. We had a little bit of technical difficulty, but I'm here.
Good. Well, let's build on what we've just heard now as we move forward on what we should be doing here. First of all, I think I'd like to really get to this a point of trust and how important it is in our relations with consumers and with our business partners. And so I'd like to sort of start with that and what we're learning from the industry. I'll give you a quote that I have always liked. This is one from Verizon EVP Chief Marketing Officer Giorgio Scotti. And he said, when it comes to connecting with consumers, there is no greater currency than trust. And then David Bell, who is somebody who was very important in starting the IAE, put it this way: trust is the currency of our business and ethics is the engine of trust. Now, I want to go now to Joanne for a moment, because you are a chief data officer. And I read a really great story in which you were quoted. And I want to give the quote and then ask you to expand upon it. It was when you actually were talking about how important, if you aren't thinking about ethics as part of your data solutions, you're losing out on consumer and customer trust. And I wish you would just build on that, and I'm going to bring the rest of you in here again on how important this is.
Thank you. And I'm going to build a little bit, I think, on where Wayne was going. In this day and age, and I think in more now than ever, I think that if you're not designing all of your products, solutions, campaigns with the individual at the center of your practices when you're using data of any kind, you're kidding yourself, right? We are well beyond the first phases of the internet and digital marketing. We are well beyond the first phases of individuals understanding that their data has value. We are in a place where individuals understand that there is a data and a digital economy and that they are part of it and that their information is both of value and that they also understand that they receive benefit from the use of their information, right? And so if you're not considering the ethics of data, and especially at this particular moment in time, guys, right? I mean, we can talk about bias in data, right? We can have a whole separate conversation about that, which is particularly pertinent. But if you're not thinking about how ethics play out in your data programs, right? And in your marketing for what we're talking about today, you're kidding yourself, right? So in every piece of your program, right? How you collect information, how you use information, and how you interact with individuals. You need to be thinking about things like accuracy of information, transparency in how you're going to use information, how you're collecting it, why you're collecting it. Are you being clear in what the benefits are for individuals, right? And how long you're going to retain it? And if you're repurposing information, are you being clear about things like secondary use? I think laws like the GDPR and the CCPA, they're setting a bar, but I think organizations have to question themselves even further and sometimes to say, what are we doing with the information? And ethically, does it align with what the consumer's expectation is? Because honestly, that's really the thrust behind the regulations, right? What's the thrust behind a lot of these regulations? And to a certain extent, when we talk about self-regulation, I think we as industry oftentimes can get ahead of regulation if we begin to think about what do our customers actually expect and want. And so when you talk about ethics, for us, we try to design with the individual at the center of our data practices, right? So individuals should benefit, meaning they should understand what they're receiving, right? They should control their data. They should own their data, right? Nobody should have better rights to the name Joanne Stonier than me, right? And of course, then there's the issues of privacy and security, which in this day and age have to be the baseline of what you are providing when you're talking about an individual's personal data. So I'll stop there.
We're going to come back to a lot of the ways in which MasterCard is practicing this. Kendra, I'd like to add a little bit in terms of the importance here of trust.
Absolutely. I mean, yes, there is so much to be said in general about kind of the social compact and the social contract that we are all negotiating right now, right? So we have this internet that is largely made available to us because it is defrayed by ad dollars and by consumers understanding that they're going to look at ads. We have figured out ways to make additional money on that by focusing our targeting and creating additional efficiencies because we understand more about who is on the end of what we're sending out. But there isn't clarity to the point that's been made a couple of times today about what exactly it is we are collecting from everybody, and then how we are decisioning and how we are connecting with them, and also what exactly that value is. There's an understanding. I saw something happen on Twitter, which is where I am generally very overexposed, a couple of weeks ago, where there was this organizational launch of a business that is looking at helping to retain the rights of data and helping you potentially get paid for your data that is getting shared to other organizations. And people were wildly excited about this because it's exciting. And they're like, yes, we're going to have, this is our IP defense. And it's like, that's not necessarily the case. One, like, your data is actually honestly not worth a lot, but it is also at the same time absolutely invaluable. So how do we navigate this conversation when no one has the same information and we're talking past each other most of the time is really, I think, where a lot of my heart is right now, because it's impossible to move beyond that and have more nuanced conversations when everybody's on such wildly different pages.
Jeff, you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Wally. Just building on Joanne and tying in Wayne's point as well. I think the reality is trust is not woven throughout every aspect or element of the consumer connection to media or advertising. So from the back end all the way through partnerships to the front end, I think, God bless all the lawyers on the phone, but the average T's and C's, they're terrible. They're not intuitive, right? So there's a notion that trust needs to be pushed throughout, not just the back end and how Joanne sort of thinks about data strategy from a database perspective or partnership perspective, but also the entire user experience and the notion that human beings context shift. They might be very comfortable and you might be building trust in one context by allowing their data to flow into a certain scenario. And if you port that trust relationship into another scenario, you might break it because they're absolutely not comfortable with sharing that kind of data in that different context. So I think there needs to be an understanding that it's not a simple fix. It's not a simple check mark. We are now CCPA compliant. To Wayne's point, how we have not self-regulated, we have been a bit disingenuous as an industry in actually trying to fundamentally build consumer trust and partnership trust in every piece of our business, and not find little loopholes where this tech partner or this agency can get really cute with how they interpret a law or even a principle that you might have and do things that really erode trust. So we're really in this industry situation where we're now, subjected to the weakest link theory, and consumers have revolted. And unfortunately, to Wayne's point, it's showing up in regulatory action here. I think CCPA is the very first move in the US, and there's going to be a lot more movement, just like we see across the pond in the EU. What's coming in October there is definitely one step further, and we need to be prepared for it. And if we don't address the core issue of trust everywhere, then we're going to continue to keep paying the legal fees.
Very good. Ethicists discuss ethical dilemmas as a right versus right issue. And I think we can make a lot of right statements about trying to focus our ads on particular people so they don't have to look at a lot of information. But how we do that is going to be critical, as you just said, because if it's done in a way in which the data is collected they don't want to have collected, then I think we run into the ethical dilemma. The other thing is you've made it clear how difficult this is, quite frankly, for the government to enforce, because there is so much data collected. How much on Facebook each day? And so I think that comes down to action by our own companies and industry to set the standards that will work. And so it's important for us to do that to keep it going. Now, I want to take one division here, and then I'm going to come back to how we do it. Steve, I would like us to talk a moment about how important trust is with our business partners. There's been a lot of that lost in the last year as well. And I'd like you to talk to that a moment, and then bring in, again, you're coming from a client background, so please come into the other issue as well.
Sure, and thanks, Wally, for the forum and for pulling this together, Wally and Andrew. It's critically important to not only support the AAF's mission to inspire and enable marketing professionals to practice the highest form of personal ethics in the creation of advertising to consumers, but also to be very mindful of the ability to self-regulate our own industry, which Wayne has already addressed. I couldn't be happier to be a part of this. We're in listen and learn mode at this point. Our own Wally Snyder, by the way, as you all well know, has literally written the book on advertising ethics and has devoted the second half of his career to building truth through transparency. He's an inspiration to us all and has been a mentor to me going all the way back to my college days. So couldn't be happier to be a part of all this. I've been president and CEO of the AAF for exactly 1 year yesterday. And prior to that, spent 21 years leading global advertising and sponsorship marketing at FedEx, which is always regarded as one of the most admired and respected companies around the globe. And certainly as their business ethics practices and history will show, they've conducted themselves in an incredibly ethical way across the globe in all of their business dealings. And I was part of that for over 20 years and learned an awful lot about practical business management, about how the client can lead those discussions and how you can bring others into the fold. I was asked to speak about IAE principle number 9, and if you'll indulge me these 2 sentences, I think they're important to this discussion. Trust between advertising and business partners, including clients, agencies, media vendors, and third-party suppliers, should be built upon full transparency and full disclosure of business ownership and arrangements, agency remuneration and rebates, and all media incentives. That's been a key cornerstone to the IAE principles since day one, and we've actually lobbied for that and positioned for that as in every possible venue that we can. Wally asked me to speak about the critical importance of that to clients, business partners, and media, and I'll have this to say about that. The importance to clients is critical because they drive so much business and they ultimately set standards both internally and externally to all the folks that they deal with. And they have to exhibit the right behaviors, conduct themselves in the right way. I think that clients' success and leadership here is the ultimate key to long-term success. A client must drive that. Clients also have the ability to take shortcuts when they want to. And when anyone sees that, they need to be sure to report that quickly and in an appropriate manner. Business partners, that circle keeps growing because people are bringing more and more business partners in. If you're not in-housing your own marketing efforts, chances are you're using agencies and counselors and suppliers and data vendors and others. And some of them have their own business standards. Some of them self-monitor their own conduct better than others. My advice there is that you have to check your networks and your contacts and make sure that you're having regular accountability discussions and sessions. To me, that's a sign of a true partnership in any way. Set up rules and processes if they're not there that support transparency and make sure that everybody's on the same page. And make that part of your quarterly business review or your quarterly business practices.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And then lastly and leastly is the media side. They have a deep responsibility to monitor everything that they're reporting, sharing, selling ads for it. So much news these days is about the news and how it's made and the social media platforms. And I think that trust and transparency have to come from the media as well. You're seeing them being attacked from all angles because of some business practices that they haven't locked in. And for that, I would encourage us all to force the issue and to drive that conversation any way we can.
Good. Now, in the last 30 minutes, what I want to do is turn to how we do this in a very competitive industry. And this will be a very important part of our discussion because we want people to really be able to learn from your experiences as we go forward. Now, Joanne, again, as you said in your remarks, you talked about the principles at MasterCard. Those 4 principles for personal data: you own it, you control it, you should benefit, we protect it. Could you just get us started on how that's done, and then we'll bring everybody in on how you would do it.
Sure. So it's a little bit tricky for us because we're mostly a B2B company with a B2C brand, right? So I don't want to say that we're the biggest B2C advertising company, because I think that that's also a little bit tricky when you look at other brands that do a whole lot more in this space than we do. I mean, we have, of course, our priceless campaigns, which are our way of interacting with our cardholders and consumers. And we do that in a very, very obvious way. But a lot of our direct to consumer work is opt-in, which is really interesting, right? When you live in an opt-out world for the most part. So it's not to say we don't work with partners that are opt-out, right? That we don't work with co-brand partners, for example, and I won't mention any by name, but we have co-brand relationships where in supporting those relationships, they might be more of an opt-out. But I think opt-outs get to be cluttered and confusing and will continue to get more so with the advent of laws like CCPA, right? And so how do you enable clarity about different practices for consumers, right? Because you can have global opt-outs, you can have different types of opt-outs in when you talk about GDPR versus California versus other jurisdictions. And if individuals don't have the right context about why opt-outs are being offered, it's a very, very cluttered space, right? And so that's one of the reasons a lot of ours are opt-in, because then we can be very clear on specific use rather than trying to say, well, we'll use it for this, but not for that, maybe for this and not for that. So oftentimes organizations go to more of a control panel type of situation where individuals can begin to engage on a relationship level basis with organizations, so that it's a menu of, this is the relationship I want to have with your organization, and I can change that over time. I think you're going to need to begin to, every organization is going to need to think about that, because opt-outs in the series of them, and they can't be pre-checked anymore, are going to get more and more difficult with the different levels. And then, of course, we have issues of, what are we going to do? You know, we have cookie opt-outs, we have, you know, one-click opt-outs, we have analytic opt-outs, right? We have a global opt-out. So when you begin to look at all the different levels of opt-outs, either people are going to ignore them, and that's not the point of the regulation, so we'll just beget more regulation, or we have to come up with a way to do it in a way that's very engaging and clear. And then, of course, the other challenge to some of this is with laws like California, where individuals can ask for their record of interaction with brands and then want to see, you know, when did you contact me or not. They can forget when they opted in or opted out. And so keeping track of that history is also going to become very complicated for organizations, so that they can remember, well, you opted out here, but then you opted back in, and then you opted back out, and they may have a much different recollection, but we're going to have to be their memory keepers. So opt-outs and opt-ins are going to become, I think, a side business for many organizations as laws like California really take off.
Jeff, you want to continue?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. I think to build on, there's going to be a very clear need as CCPA and then what's happening in the EU hits marketers as well, for marketers to have a very comprehensive identity strategy to everything that Joanne just spoke of, not just the data strategy, but the notion of understanding users and the context switching that I spoke of earlier, whether you're a father or a mother, or whether you're managing somebody else's health data in a child type of environment for elder parents. Those things matter tremendously. And I think the appetite for marketers to work in unauthenticated or non-permissioned environments is going to continue to decrease, making that need for really nice and really fluid user at the center, absolutely solid identity strategy is going to be the key. We've had that as a wake up over the last few months that this is coming to the industry. Right now it's very fragmented, and we need to find a path forward for everyone to be able to do that, to be able to continue to bring the really the ease of that they've had over the last decade or two. If that's going to continue, then identity is going to have to be at the forefront of that.
Well,
Joanne, do you want to respond?
yeah, I just wanted to kind of pile on a little bit to what Jeff's saying. I mean, literally in Europe, you must gather accurate information. And if you're doing any kind of profiling, right? I mean, if you're creating any of that information, it would rise to the level of creating a profile. And so unless you've engaged directly, you can't create that kind of information out of whole cloth or out of any inference. So it's going to require that kind of engagement and consent, which, you know, just is going to require a different kind of relationship building with individuals. I think that's what Jeff's trying to say. And so if you don't have that engagement strategy, it is a completely different shift. And that's why I think if you're not building from an ethical place and from a trustworthy place, and it's an engagement strategy now rather than just a marketing attribute strategy to build profiles, I think that is a place that all organizations have to get to. And in this moment where people are looking for authenticity, I think it's a better place to build longer term relationships with individual customers and prospects as well, perhaps.
Kendra?
Definitely. So thank you. I have kind of two thoughts on this. One is, so I've spent a great deal of time, for those of you who are not intimately aware with exactly what we're doing at Sparks and Honey, which is part of the larger Omnicom network, my remit for the last 3.5 years has been to figure out ways to quantify culture. And so I am using data from all sorts of different sources to try to understand what is happening in the world in different ways, what people are thinking, what they're feeling, what they're doing. But we decided to take kind of a different slice at it than I'd ever taken in my life. So where for a number of years I was working deeply with audience data from a number of different data providers, most of whom I'm sure you can guess because you know them all. And when I came to Sparks and Honey, what I wanted to do was kind of experiment with just how much I can figure out when I use only free range data. When I use data that has no connection to individual people, in part because I know myself and I know that I'm a little bit of a compliance nightmare, just in that I like to build fast, I like to explore things, and it's actually just way easier for me if I'm not storing individual personalized information unless I absolutely have to. So as best as possible, I avoid anything that could possibly be anywhere close to PII. And what I've learned is, in part, you know, we've almost over-focused on the incredibly granular individual personal, because we can figure out a lot of stuff just from looking at what is kind of free and in the ether, whether it's what's happening on Twitter, which is considered by and large, if you just look at the text, not to necessarily have that personalized implication. The other thing that I think is incredibly important is that, and I know that individuals literally on this webinar are working on this, but the biggest thing that I have to teach to young data scientists is not how to do the work. The biggest thing that I have to teach young data scientists is how to make decisions and understand the potential implications of those decisions. Because, you know, it's one thing to say, oh, you know, we're trying to, you know, we're doing our best, we're operating in ways that are unbiased, but I don't need to use somebody's racial and ethnic information, those demographic pieces to target somebody or to exclude somebody from a targeting practice. I can just know your zip code. And because of the way that most of the world works, I can infer that because it's essentially a proxy variable. So we also need that work around thinking and getting clear on what is and is not right, how we bring ethics to our work every day, because that's incredibly important when we start to think through. This is going to continue to evolve. Things are going to continue to be messy. But if we have people who are ethical at their cores, I trust that we'll get through this with a lot less strife and with a lot better privacy at the end of this, which is what I'm really gearing for.
Yeah. Let me go to Wayne. What about Wayne? Could you add something here about maybe your views on this in privacy and how to do it, and also maybe some of what's being done by the World Federation of Advertising in Europe?
You're on mute, Wayne.
Unmute.
Thank you. Wally, I know your FTC background. And so what I'm going to say is near and dear to you. In summary, I think that what you need to have is transparency. As long as you let the consumer know what you're doing, they're probably all right with it. Yes, there are people who complain about absolutely everything in this world, and you're going to have those few. But what people don't like are surprises. And if you let them know what you're doing, they generally are okay with it. And so as long as you don't do anything unethical, and as long as you let someone know what you're doing and why you're doing it, as a general matter, Americans, unlike Europeans, have come to accept the fact that if they give some of their own personal information to somebody, their user experience can be a little better. And they don't seem to mind that. And so let them know that they're getting a better user experience from it. Explain to them how it helps you, it helps them, it drives down prices, it provides them with more relevant information. And I don't think you're going to have the problems that I see coming in the future if we don't behave in a proper ethical way.
Yeah, I think what you're saying there is if we take time to really convince consumers of the value of using their data appropriately and that standards will be followed, this may be something that will help a great deal in our doing this. And I can tell you that I know that consumers, what I call consumer information power, consumers now really will go online and will talk about a company doing the right thing. We've had instances where over 90% of the consumers have said, yes, I went on and I praise this company. Over 85% have taken a negative viewpoint against the company. So we do have consumer information power now. They really can do a lot more. And I like your idea of really working with them on the value of this and how we can do it the best way.
You know, you have two companies on this panel that each have very good reputations in the public, and that's MasterCard and Microsoft. And each of them have that reputation because they tend to disclose to the consumers what they're doing and they don't take advantage of them. And that's really a meaningful distinction. I think that the comment that Jeff made earlier about, you know, everybody gets dirty when one person jumps in a mud puddle is very much true, which is why industry standards and making people understand the importance of adhering to them becomes so important.
Mm-hmm. You know, one thing is you've been really talking about what you're doing in your companies, or you have principles. How do you articulate those principles within your company? How do you get them down to all of the people in your large companies that are going to be doing this on a day-by-day basis? So talk a little bit about the programs you have in that regard that others could follow. Would you start, Kendra?
Sure. So, I mean, I in part have a little bit easier. Sparks and Honey is a small organization, so it is incredibly easy to both prototype and then kind of prototype and iterate on things with my own team. So we've been we started 3 years ago with very clear ideas around our take on data governance, our take on data stewardship. And so, you know, we make sure that anytime we have somebody new to the team, this is something that they're inculcated into, and that this is something we're all aware of and it gets shared out. We also, you know, make sure that this is getting shared with our larger organizations. So Sparks and Honey is really big on ensuring that, you know, the tech side of the house is talking to the consulting side of the house, because we work directly with so many clients. So so all of this information is shared out and everybody kind of has access to it. We also do a lot of work with partnership organizations. So we have an advisory board, several members of whom are leading academics, mostly specifically around data ethics. Some at NYU, a few other places, and we worked with them last year to actually work on a precision report about the implications writ large of precision data. But then also, you know, what does this mean in terms of a Bill of Rights? And so, you know, we've made sure that literally everyone in the company is aware and is talking to this, is helping shape this, because all of us are consumers. All of us are also working with clients, and all of us are needing to think about, whether it's from an individual end or from a stewardship end, how we are making this our problem. I have a number of friends who are in cybersecurity, and the weakest link is always all of the individuals and all of the employees. And that's absolutely also true when it comes to your data governance. Like, it is about how people are making day-to-day decisions. And so making sure that we keep that in mind is incredibly important.
When we talked, I was really impressed by your talking about nothing is decided in a vacuum.
Yeah.
What are the implications? What are the implications? Regular conversations. Has to be thoughtful. Potential implication, adjust, though inconvenient.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's really a process, isn't it? Where
It
you
is.
expect people to undergo that, not to make a set decision. It's going to hurt. Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, so part of it is that tech has, and this is something that, like, as a technologist, I am guilty of this as well. Like, we are very move fast and break things, like build it, test it, see what's going on, and we'll iterate on it, right? But too often then we don't slow down for a moment to thoughtfully consider all of the implications. And so, yeah, what we try to do is balance that in, like, take a moment of, like, hit the pause button as frequently as we need to, as often as we can, to make sure that, you know, we're not doing something without considering the implications, because especially when it comes to data, like, I'm a former social scientist, like, what you do and the decisions that you make have all sorts of ramifications that you can't necessarily predict. So how are we, as best as possible, aligning, I mean, really, it's an abstracted version of the scientific method, as best as possible in the context now, to make sure that we're iterating and rethinking on as ongoing a basis as possible, because there are now SaaS companies appearing that are SaaS for data governance, because that's where we are right now. And so I think that we're at this edge of people not even knowing that that's where our needs are. And so we've got a lot of people that need to get up to speed really fast.
You know, one of the things that an ethicist will say is on ethics is that your middle managers are going to be the ones who are setting your company's ethics, or actually applying your ethics. And we know this has to come from the top down, but there really has to be a chance to talk about it. And the other thing is, I would get a lot of, look, we got to move fast. We got to move quick. And yet I found many instances, if they had only discussed it wouldn't have been a problem later that blew up in their face. And that was including a lot of ethical issues. So again, I think people here listening are going to be wanting to know how to do this in an explosive environment. So let me go back to Jeff and then Joanne on this. Jeff, how about you? I mean, how do your company sort of engage in this?
Yeah, we're pretty fortunate. Obviously, we have a lot of resources, but the consistency across every role type is really important. So we have really robust training that goes from partnership teams to front end, back end engineers, to any data scientist, anybody who touches data or touches a front end consumer experience. And I think having the luxury of those resources allows us to be consistent in our principles and applying those principles to everybody. But it's the intensity that our leadership takes from the top down, from Satya down, to make sure compliance is adhered to from a letter and a spirit of the law. Like, we have an absolute commitment, not just to check a box when we sign a contract or partnership, but to make sure that we are at every level adhering to our commitments that we've made to people, to human beings, whether they're customers or end users. advertisers, publishers, et cetera. And that consistency is extremely important. And I think the notion that, it just takes one, that weak link theory. Every time a contract comes up for renewal, you have to do the due diligence to ask tough questions. What has changed since the last time we looked at this document? Back it up against regulation and really ask some tough questions that slow things down a little bit. So to Kendra's point, you can't necessarily move as fast as you want to in every situation. But then you also avoid those Cambridge Analytica types of scenarios where, boy, they probably had thousands of contracts they executed really well, and somebody just didn't do the due diligence on one, and look what it's done to the industry and what it's done to them.
Yeah, and I think that it's really important to have this process in mind because there's so much data that's going to be collected and so many things going on at once that your people really have to know what you expect. How about, would you like to Joanne, add something to that? I mean, I know you have principles and guidelines and.
Yep. We have all of the above. I mean, we have our data responsibility principles, which really are meant to be a code of ethics of not only how do we want to treat, how do we believe an individual should be treated, but how we respond to that. So it starts with really, kind of mom and apple pie principles of being accountable and providing transparency and control for individuals on how they want their data to be used. But then along the lines of what Kendra was talking about, using data with integrity, and integrity goes to really issues of accuracy and completeness of the data. But really in this new world of machine learning and AI, we have a whole ethical AI process of reviewing the data sets that go into the algorithmic process. And many of the things that Kendra was talking about, we are at a real tipping point right now around machine learning, and how do you really make sure that all sorts of bias, from population bias, inherent bias, sampling bias, you really are looking at your data sets, and that you are really working with your data scientists and analysts so that we begin to really weed out what are we doing with data in context, right? One of the challenges of data and system building and product building is that in different contexts, the same data set can absolutely be, in one context, it can be fit for purpose, and in another context, it can absolutely be the wrong data set. And so if you're not looking at the integrity, and that's what the principle that we talk about a lot, then you're going to get the innovation wrong. And we also talk about that, but data needs to be utilized for innovation. And we can get ourselves really tripped up if we bind up data for so much scrutiny and governance that we're not allowing it for the next generation of innovation. And, in the first wave of the COVID crisis, I think all of us probably, I'm sure Kendra and Jeff, you were feeling the same pressure as I was to free up enough data to try to solve some of the problems. I'm sorry, I'm getting some background noise here. Hold on, let me see if I can.
As she's going out for a moment, Lee, I want to go to Lee Peeler a minute.
Hold on, Wally.
Lee,
Sure.
But, I think that we need to free up data for innovation to also solve societal problems as well. And I don't think that we have yet figured out how to do enough of the data sharing in an ethical manner, I think, to some of what we've talked about. And that's a whole different conversation of how do we set up enough of the ecosystems for ethical data sharing or information sharing to really solve things in an efficient and effective manner. So that's a whole other, I think, level of data innovation that we need to get to.
Now, would that be something that we maybe would think about at the Institute for Advertising Ethics, is to bring you together for some of these discussions and for sharing of some of this? I think that might be something we really want to think on.
And so while this is Lee, I mean, I think that's exactly right. And, I just wanted to mention there's a new study that just came out from the World Federation of Advertisers that said that when they surveyed their members, who are the best of the best, right, that 40% of them felt like they'd been in situations where data was being used in morally questionable circumstances. And then, as Jeff mentioned in the Facebook issue, one of the things the Federal Trade Commission's order does is set up a whole separate process for making, decisions about data use at Facebook that reports directly to the CEO. So if you think about, the great work that you've done in the Institute, and compare it to where we started where Wally and I started in the 1970s, the whole question was, does advertising have to be truthful? And, the industry has just nailed that, dead. And if you talk to an advertising industry member now, the emphasis on truth is absolute and much more than any other industry. You need to get there with data handling and data privacy. And the California, going back to where I started, the California Privacy Act, it is a baseline. And I can think of, right off the top of my head, 7 or 8 bubbling issues, and particularly the one that Joanne mentioned about algorithmic decision making and biometrics and customer profiling, that are all bubbling around out there and really could use, just what this panel is talking about, which is what's the ethical policy structure that we need to think about and resolve.
We had a question that came in that said, well, just because you could use this data in this particular instance, do you have to? You have to use that data? I mean, what do you think about that?
You don't. Like,
You don't. That's the trap, right? If just because you have the data and you could use it, I mean, you have to do, basically what Microsoft did when they had the COVID-19 issue, was to look and say, here's what our company's principles are about how we use the data.
Yep.
Yeah.
Comments on that?
I mean, I think it's just that, right? Like, it's just, so as somebody who has been using data and in love with data for many, many, many years, like most data people, most data scientists are data hoarders. Like, we want to capture all of the data that we possibly can, because if it's not useful now, it could potentially be useful at some point. And so, like, just give me as much of it as possible. You don't have to use it. You don't. There is a different way to accomplish what you want to do most of the time. It may be harder, it may cost more, it may be less efficient, but there's a way to do it. And so that's where the asking, is this the right thing, becomes so important. You have a lot of researchers who were, key researchers in image recognition work that are now disavowing work that they've done and saying they want to be nowhere near image recognition because they are worried about the ways that it's being used and the ways that it's being implemented. So just because we can do things doesn't usually mean it's a good idea and that we should be. And it's worth keeping that in mind.
One question that just came in was, shouldn't there be a consumer advocate on this discussion? Representing the consumer? And I think that actually that's a good ethics question. I think we want to, and I think that you're really expressing how consumers feel. And I think so the big thing is to make sure we know what consumers want in a particular issue and then follow that. I would just like to stay here in the last minute. I think this has been very valuable, and I'm going to really be contacting all of you, because I think we need to keep this discussion going and find some ways in which we can be specific in helping some of these companies, smaller ones, to do the right thing. And that's our ethical definition. We're doing the right thing here. But again, I want to thank you all very, very much. I've got 1 minute left. Anybody have a comment? No?
I just think, thanks for doing this, Wally. Thanks for pulling us all together. Definitely happy to do it again. I think this is an evolving topic, and I continue to have industry.
Okay.
Thank you.
We will be back to all of you. And Andrew, that's what we're going to be doing. So I really appreciate it. Andrew, why don't you take right now over? By the way, thank you all. I'll be back to each one of you.
Okay, thank you.
And Andrew, please do the linkage now that you want to do, and then we'll stop the broadcast, but we'll listen to you.
I'll start by thanking Iowa's own Wally Snyder and tell people, thanks to the panelists in general, and tell the audience that if you haven't been assigned a code for the sessions that are following this that are specialized by topic, you can find those on the site at aaf.org/ethics. We really appreciate everyone's involvement and for taking this hour out of your day and devoting it to this. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey, thank you all very much. We'll be back together.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.